A shadow lurks where orchids bloom. Welcome to Wolfe's Casebook. I am your host, Enigma. Share in the comments where you're watching from today. I love reading everyone. Now, let's uncover the mystery. If there's a clean way to explain first things, I've never found it. The brownstone is a machine, but it isn't built like one. It runs on habit, pride, and the separate sovereignties of three men who would all deny caring about the other two. That's me, Archie Goodwin, Fritz Brenner, who thinks in sauces, and Nero Wolfe, who thinks in everything else, and mostly from the red leather chair in his office, where his body sits like a monument and his brain goes sightseeing. The day started the way any day worth keeping does, with routine intact and the city outside behaving itself by staying outside. At 8:15, I was at the kitchen table with coffee and the paper, giving the headlines the kind of attention a man gives to a street organist playing the tune he doesn't want to hum. Fritz was in the kitchen, and the kitchen was in Fritz. Clinks and murmurs, and a German baritone scolding a roast. At 11:50, which is when Wolfe is halfway through his morning beer and his tolerance for human interruption is at its weekly low, the bell at the front door rang. Not a timid poke. A long, clean press, like the finger behind it was sure the door wanted to open. I got up because that's my job, to be the hinge between Wolfe and the world, the one who smiles so he doesn't have to. I went through the hall, past the hat stand that had never held an ordinary hat in its life, and opened the door. The woman standing on the stoop was not ordinary either. She was tall in the washed, controlled way a dancer is tall. No slack to her posture, no wasted curve. She wore a dark coat that looked too new to be bought and too good to be rented. Her hair was the color of chestnuts trying to be mahogany, arranged with the kind of careful neglect that only money can afford. If she needed a hat, she wasn't showing it. Her face had that calm, finished quality that comes from deciding early what you're going to be, and then being it hard enough to make the world adjust. "Good morning," she said, and even that sounded like she knew the morning personally. Her voice was low and steady, velvet without trying. I kept my own voice a notch above friendly. "Morning. You want the tour or the menu?" The faintest shift in her eyes told me she understood a wisecrack the way a surgeon understands a Band-Aid. "It's fine, but let's get to the fracture. I want Mr. Wolfe." "Most people do," I said. "Some just don't know it yet." "Come in." She stepped into the hall like she belonged to it and then stood there, taking in the carved banister, the faint edge of orchid humidity that always leaked down from the plant rooms upstairs, and the silence that is never really silence in a house where someone like Wolfe lives. "Mr. Goodwin?" she asked. "That's me. How did you know?" People who see to doors look as if they see to doors. I liked that. I liked her even more for saying it without smiling. "Coats go there," I said, nodding at the closet. "Names go here." Celia Harrow. The name rang a bell I hadn't heard in a while. Not a loud one. A bell from the society pages, the kind that tinkles when somebody's generosity gets photographed at a hospital wing opening. I tried to place it while she unbuttoned her coat. "You've been to see Mr. Wolfe before?" I asked. "No." "Then this is the part where you tell me what you want from him so I can decide whether to let you up or take a message for the circular file." She handed me the coat without a wrinkle in her tone. "I want to speak to him privately. It concerns a matter that will be easier to state to him than to you." That line gets used about 4 times a year. When it's sincere, I can hear it. When it's a bluff, I can smell it. This one was sincere enough to be dangerous. "Okay," I said. "Come on in. Keep your voice down. He's in his office." We moved through the hall toward the office door. I could feel her noticing the house the way a good chess player notices the board before she moves. The brownstone makes an impression on people. It's not gilded, but it's stubborn. It tells you that you're coming into a place where your manners will be weighed. I opened the office door and let her in first. Wolfe was where he belonged, which in his case means where he stays, in the big red chair behind his desk, shoulders filling the space like a bear in a library. The desk was orderly, which for Wolfe is not a sign of cleanliness but of readiness. His eyes moved to her, then to me, then back to her. He didn't stand. That wasn't rudeness. That was Wolfe being Wolfe, which is a principle, not a posture. "Miss Harrow," he said as if he had just finished writing her name in his head. "Mr. Goodwin, beer." "You got it," I said, "because there are battles worth picking, and there are battles involving a man of 1/6 my mobility and 3 times my stubbornness, and I'm not stupid." I went to the sideboard, poured the beer, set it on the coaster within his reach, and sat in my chair by the desk, pen ready. Wolfe's eyebrows twitched a millimeter in my direction. "Archie," he said. That was all. It meant out. If he wants me out, he wants me out. Usually. But Wolfe doesn't get private visitors unless he has a reason. Sometimes the reason is that he wants to look at them without me watching. Sometimes it's that he wants to make them sweat. Sometimes it's something else. I started to get up anyway, mostly to see what he'd do. Miss Harrow spoke first, smoothly. "Mr. Wolfe, I would prefer Mr. Goodwin remain. I understand he's not merely a secretary." Wolfe regarded her. "You understand correctly. Nonetheless, when I say Archie, I mean Archie." Her gaze flicked to me. She was weighing how far to push in the first 10 seconds. I gave her a very small shrug. My best diplomatic gesture, meaning I'm employed, not owned. She chose her moment. "I'm here," she said to Wolfe, "about an intrusion into your house." There are sentences that don't belong in a person's mouth, like a gemstone in a soup spoon. That one didn't belong in hers. She said it too cleanly, too deliberately. It wasn't a slip. It was a placement. Wolfe's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in interest. I stayed seated. "Proceed," Wolfe said. She sat in the client chair without being asked. It's not that you can't sit in Wolfe's office uninvited. It's that most people can't make it look like they're doing Wolfe a favor by sitting down. She did. "You may not have heard of me," she continued. "I have heard of you," Wolfe said. "Your husband endowed the Harrow Pediatric Clinic. He died 2 years ago. You have continued to support it. You live on East 73rd Street." The only thing missing was her horoscope. Her face didn't show surprise. It showed acceptance. "Yes. Since my husband's death, I've overseen his foundation. Included among our holdings is a private collection of botanical artifacts. Most are in our townhouse. A few are on loan." "Artifacts," Wolfe repeated, tasting it like a word with grit. "Letters, prints, rare folios, personal notes." She paused. "One of them is missing. From your townhouse. From this house." That got quiet enough to hear time turning pages. My pen hovered. Wolfe's expression stayed still, but inside him I knew the gears had just changed ratio. "You are misinformed," Wolfe said. "I'm not." She opened her handbag and drew out a flat envelope. Her movements were tidy as a folded napkin. She passed it across the desk. Wolfe didn't touch it. His eyes went to me. "Archie." This time it meant, "Read it." I took the envelope, slid out the contents, and found what looked like a photograph and a thin sheet of paper. The photo was black and white and showed a narrow door in a wall, definitely an interior door, old, with a brass knob and a faint shadow around the frame. On the door was something that made my scalp tighten a little placard, the kind people use to label rooms. The placard read, in neat serifed print, "Orchid Room." Under the photo was a second image, a close-up of the placard itself, which had a tiny scratch on the lower right corner shaped like a hook. The paper was a note. It was typed, no signature. "I returned what was yours. Something else is now mine. You won't miss it until you know what it is." I looked up. "Where'd you get these?" "Yesterday," Miss Harrow said. "They were inside a folio on my desk." The folio had not been moved. Wolfe's voice was a shade frostier. "That does not explain why you have brought them to me." "It does, Mr. Wolfe. If you understand the folio, it is on loan here. It concerns orchids." Wolfe's eyes moved barely to the right, toward the wall that backed into the hall, and beyond that, the front rooms. The plant rooms were upstairs. The orchids were Wolfe's religion. He also kept, in a locked cabinet upstairs, a folder of orchid-related correspondence from a dozen botanists and collectors, some of it rare enough to make a museum director breathless. "Which folio is on loan here?" he asked. "A folio of letters between Wilhelmina Kreutzer and a man named Emil Auster. Both were German botanists in the 1880s. The letters describe an orchid hybrid that—" She hesitated, perhaps because she had seen Wolfe's face change by 1/10 of a degree. "That does not matter. The folio is yours by arrangement with my late husband. You keep it in your orchid rooms. I saw it there last month when I came to deliver another item." Wolfe took that in, eyes still. "You have been in my plant rooms." "Briefly, yes. With Mr. Brenner." Fritz would faint twice if he knew she had spoken of his orchids as if they were chess pieces. "Then something has been removed from the folio?" "Yes." "And you believe the removal was made by someone who entered this house?" "I don't believe. I know." She drew a breath that made her shoulders rise like a clean lift. "Only 3 people were in the orchid rooms during the week the folio was last consulted. Mr. Brenner, Mr. Horstmann, your gardener's assistant, and a man from the foundation sent to verify humidity controls." Wolfe made a small sound of distaste. "I permit no foundation man to touch my orchids." He did not touch the orchids. He took notes at the doorway. Mr. Brenner watched him. Mr. Horstmann was on a ladder, trimming. I spoke to all 3. None of them removed anything, and the folio is now missing a letter that described a place, a method, and a name. "Which name?" She met his eyes directly. "Yours." That's when I felt it. The slight tug at the air that means the sanctity of this joint had just been put in play. In the brownstone, you can insult Wolfe's appetite, his laziness, his vocabulary, and his waistline. But you don't touch his orchids, and you don't use his name as a pawn unless you're prepared to see who's really playing. Wolfe had not moved, but the room was different. His voice, when it came, was mild and absolute. "You are here because you wish me to retrieve the missing letter. I wish you to discover who removed it and why." She waited a beat. "And I wish that the brownstone not become implicated in something sordid. If the letter is used improperly, it could embarrass you. It could also destroy a project my husband wore to protect." "Explain." She looked down for the first time, and I could see there was a seam there, a line of strain she had pressed flat and polished over. "My husband acquired the Kreutzer Auster letters after a long dispute with a collector named Percival Vane. Vane claimed they were his by family inheritance. The courts disagreed. He never forgave us. The letters contain proof of how a certain orchid hybrid was created, one that is, to some people, worth more than money. If Vane, or someone acting for him, has the missing letter, he can claim he was the true source of the hybrid and use that to sever the Foundation's rights with our partner institutions." I blinked. Orchid blackmail. Her eyes flicked towards me, and there it was again, the medical look. "Yes, but I'm not sure the motive is only financial. The note says, 'Something else is now mine.' That feels personal." Wolfe listened without interrupting. When she was done, he folded his hands on his stomach. "You are proposing," he said, "that someone penetrated my plant rooms, removed a letter containing my name, photographed the door to the orchid room, and left a note for you. That is what occurred. You have not consulted the police?" "No." "Why not?" She didn't flinch. Because the police would come here. They would tramp through your plant rooms. They would want to question your staff. The press would smell it. I would rather pay you. That was honest enough to taste like metal. Wolfe glanced at me. The glance was a decision in embryo. "Miss Harrow," he said, "I do not accept cases about orchids unless the orchids are mine. They are yours. The letters are on loan to you. The door in that photograph is your orchid room door. The scratch on the placard, look closely, is identical to the one under your placard upstairs. I had those installed for you. I know every inch of them." She hadn't raised her voice once. She didn't need to. She was in the room the way a knife is in a sleeve. Not flashy, but precise. Wolfe turned his eyes back to her. "You are offering me employment to protect both the integrity of your foundation and the dignity of my house." "Yes." He leaned back, which for Wolfe is the equivalent of pacing. "You have said that 3 people were present during the last consultation of the folio. There may be others who have had access to this house, directly or indirectly. I must have particulars." "I can provide them." She opened her bag again. "I brought a list." She placed a sealed packet on Wolfe's desk. He didn't open it. He didn't have to. Not yet. "Before we proceed," he said, "I would like one point clarified. You spoke of the sanctity of this house being threatened. One does not bring that concern to me unless one has a reason to believe I will be concerned." "I do." "What reason?" She studied him hard, and in her eyes I could see the shine of someone who had decided the dangerous truth was still better than a safe lie. "Because, Mr. Wolfe," she said quietly, "I think the person who took that letter didn't come here for orchids. At all." Wolfe waited. "He can outwait a glacier. He came here," she continued, "because of something behind the orchid door." There was a beat where nothing moved. Not my hand. Not Wolfe's eyes. Not even the air. Then Wolfe spoke softly. "Archie, ring Mr. Panzer." That was my first clue that this wasn't going to be a tidy little plant caper. Wolfe doesn't call Saul Panzer for missing letters unless he's already tasted blood in the soup. I got up, went to the phone on the side table, and dialed Saul's number. While it rang, I looked back at Celia Harrow. She was sitting as straight as a verdict, calm as a chapel, and watching Wolfe not as a client watches a detective, but as someone watches a locked box she knows holds her last card. Saul answered, and I gave him the short version. When I hung up, Wolfe was still looking at Celia Harrow. He hadn't said yes. He hadn't said no. But he had called Saul. That's how you tell the brownstone has been disturbed. Not by noise, but by the way Nero Wolfe stops pretending he isn't interested. Saul Panzer was due in an hour, which in Wolfe time is nearly prompt. Until then, the office belonged to Wolfe and the woman, and to me only by sufferance. I didn't go out. Wolfe had not told me to, and Celia Harrow had asked I stay. When Wolfe permits 2 contrary impulses to occupy the same room, it's because he expects interest from the collision. He watched her for a full, comfortable minute. Comfortable for him, I mean. For her, I couldn't tell. Her face had the stillness of a portrait, but a portrait can burn. "You will tell me," Wolfe said at last, "what you mean by something behind the orchid door. I do not tolerate metaphor in my house unless it is in a book." It wasn't a metaphor. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and did it so neatly that it looked like a habit learned to keep emotions from spilling. "I discovered a fact about your plant rooms that I believe someone else has also discovered. The letter that is missing described it." "Describe what?" She looked at me again, not to include me, but to measure me. I let my face do what Wolfe trained it to do, neutral and mildly bored. It irritates people into honesty. "Among the Kreutzer Oster letters," she said, "there is one from Oster in 1887. He tells Wilhelmina he has sent her a pressed flower and a sketch of a greenhouse arrangement used by a New York collector. He was in America for a time. The sketch is of a door concealed behind orchid shelving. A hidden compartment, in effect, The letter says the collector used it to keep certain specimens and papers from rivals. Wolfe's eyes went to half-mast. You imply that my orchid rooms contain a concealed door. They do. That was a fine moment for my eyebrows to climb. I've been upstairs enough to know the corridors and the chains and the humidity gauges, but I had never seen anything that looked like a secret door, unless you count the locked cabinets Wolfe doesn't like to label for the help. Wolfe's voice was quiet, but you could hear the density in it. Miss Harrow, my plant rooms were built in 1936 to the specifications of Theodore Horstmann. I've been their proprietor for a long time. There is no concealed door. She didn't rush. She didn't try to win the beat with volume. She simply slid her handbag nearer and opened it again. Out came a folded sheet of thick paper. I didn't say you knew about it, she replied. I said it was there. The Oster letter included a tracing of the layout. It matched your third plant room precisely. The shelf along the north wall is not fixed to the studs. It is anchored to a hinge line. The door is behind it. Wolfe stared at her as if she had just proposed putting ketchup on his shad roe. The insult was not to his taste, but to his sovereignty. A hidden door in his orchid rooms without his knowledge? If true, it was a kind of heresy. I will go upstairs, he said. I opened my mouth on instinct. Boss! His hand lifted 1 inch. An edict. Not now, Archie. He looked at Celia Harrow. You will remain here. You will not leave this house until I return. That took a shade of color from her face. Not fear exactly. More the annoyance of being told what to do in someone else's tone. But she nodded. Wolfe pushed on the arms of the chair. Now, to the uninformed, Wolfe standing up is like a cathedral walking. It isn't supposed to happen except under special circumstances, and it makes you check if the sky is holding. I had seen him rise for a corpse in the hall and once for an insult to his chef. This ranked close. He got to his feet, majestically slow, and moved toward the door. I was already in position to open it for him. When he passed, I caught the faint fragrance of beer and tobacco, and the more abstract smell of a man who has decided something will not be permitted in his universe. We went up the stairs. The plant floor has its own atmosphere. Warmer, damp, alive. The orchid rooms are glassed in sanctuaries with banks of lamps and rows of benches and 1,000 green throats drinking light. Wolfe moved among them with the solemnity of a bishop in his nave. Fritz was not there. It was just past noon, and he wouldn't be within 10 yards of the orchids during their sacred hours, unless Wolfe summoned him. Wolfe didn't stop to admire. He went straight to the third room, the one at the back. The north wall carried shelves of pots and a tall rack of bloom stakes. I could hardly imagine any part of it moving. Wolfe stood before it, eyes narrowing, and then, without hesitation, reached to the edge where the shelf met the wall. He pressed. There was a sound I didn't like, a small click any house makes when it admits it has secrets. Wolfe pressed harder, and the entire shelving unit moved, swinging outward like a slow jaw. Behind it was a door, not a flimsy panel, but a real, old, heavy door, set in a frame that had been painted to match the wall. Wolfe stood there, looking at it. I was behind him, staring like a man who has just learned his favorite chair has a trap door. Well, I'll be damned, I said softly. You will be silent, Wolfe replied, also softly. You can tell how badly he feels something by how controlled the voice is. This is intolerable. He didn't touch the knob right away. He studied the hinges, the line of paint, the age of the wood. The door had the faint dullness of something that had been there long and disguised thoroughly. Old enough to predate Wolfe's tenancy? Possibly. Old enough that no one had mentioned it because no one had known. He put a hand on the knob. Behind that door I expected a closet, maybe a crawl space, maybe a structural oddity that Horstmann had used to route pipes. What I did not expect was a short, narrow passage leading to a second door at the far end, with a simple iron latch. It was like finding a second throat in a man who swore he only had one. Wolfe did not step in. He doesn't step in if he can command the stepping to be done for him, and right then I could feel the battle in his mind between outrage and curiosity. Outrage would have him seal the thing with concrete and have Horseman's ghost shot. Curiosity wanted to know what a door led to inside his kingdom. "Archie," he said, "go in." "Yes, sir." I slipped past him. The passage was no more than 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, dry and dusty. At the far end, I lifted the latch and opened the second door. It led into a small room I'd never seen. Not part of the plant rooms, no windows, bare plaster, a bench along one wall, and a metal cabinet that looked as if it had survived a war by refusing to acknowledge it. On the bench lay a flat leather portfolio. I didn't touch anything. I've learned that if something is hidden, it has opinions about fingerprints. "Boss," I called. He stood in the doorway, refusing to enter the passage. "What is there?" "A little room, empty except for a cabinet and a portfolio on the bench." I swallowed. "Looks like it's been used lately. No dust on the portfolio." His eyes hardened. "Bring it." I carried the portfolio out and handed it to him. He took it with both hands, like it offended him to need hands at all. He opened it there, standing among his orchids like a judge holding a guilty exhibit. Inside was not a botanical letter. It was a sheaf of modern papers, typed, clipped, and arranged. Wolfe flipped the first page. His mouth did something I didn't like. It wasn't a frown, it was a tightening, as if he'd bitten something too bitter to swallow. "What is it?" I asked. "Not here." He closed the portfolio. We returned to the office. We went downstairs without a word. Wolfe moved faster than he had going up, which for him is the equivalent of a gallop. When we entered the office again, Celia Harrow stood up. She read Wolfe's face instantly. "You found it," she said. "We found something," Wolfe corrected. He did not sit yet. "Miss Harrow, you said a letter describing this door is missing from the folio. I will see the folio at once." "It is at my house. I can have it brought." "No. Mr. Goodwin will accompany you now to retrieve it." Wolfe looked at me. "Archie, take the car. Take Saul when he arrives. Bring the folio and any related materials you possess." I should have expected that. Wolfe hates leaving his house, but he hates being manipulated inside it even more. Pushing me out into the street was his way of pulling back the board so he could see the whole game. Celia Harrow nodded, but her eyes were on the portfolio in Wolfe's hands. "What did you find behind the door?" Wolfe finally lowered himself into his chair, the world resuming its correct geometry around him. He set the portfolio on the desk, palm on top like a paperweight. "A second intrusion," he said. "One that concerns me more than orchids. If the contents of these papers are what they appear to be, then your missing letter is not the principal object. It is an instrument." She didn't blink. "An instrument for what?" "For a purpose I do not yet know, but it was hidden in my house. That makes it my business." The bell at the front door rang again. Long, clean press, like the finger behind it was sure the door wanted to open. I stood. "That'll be Saul." Wolfe's eyes stayed on Celia Harrow, but his voice carried iron. "Archie, from this moment, there will be no more surprises behind my orchid door." I opened the door and Saul Panzer came in with his hat in his hand, his coat on his arm, and that mild, detached look he uses when he's walking into trouble he intends to profit from. Saul is a lean man with the face of a Sunday school teacher who found the cash box open and didn't like what he was tempted to do. He nodded to me, nodded to Wolfe, and then let his eyes land on Celia Harrow with the faintest pause, enough to register her as important and dangerous. "Afternoon," I said. "Saul, this is Miss Celia Harrow. Miss Harrow, Saul Panzer." "How do you do?" she said. Saul's politeness is a habit, not a performance. "Miss Harrow?" He hung his coat, settled himself in the chair opposite Wolfe's desk, and waited. Saul doesn't talk first unless he's selling something, and Wolfe doesn't give a man like Saul words unless he knows what he wants them to do. Wolfe tapped the portfolio with a fat finger. "Mr. Panzer, there is a concealed chamber behind the north shelving in the third plant room upstairs. We discovered it 25 minutes ago." Saul's eyebrows rose a shade. "Concealed chamber in the Orchid rooms?" "Yes." "And you didn't know about it?" "No." "That," Saul said mildly, "is an insult." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "It is. The chamber contained this portfolio. I've not examined it thoroughly. I've perused enough to know it is not botanical." Saul looked at the portfolio as if deciding whether it was a snake. "May I?" Wolfe slid it toward him. Saul opened it, flipped through the pages with the quick efficiency of a man who has read more secrets than novels. His face didn't change much, but the muscles around his mouth set a little tighter with each page. "Well," he said finally, closing it, "that is a good deal less charming than orchids." "What is it?" Celia Harrow asked. Saul glanced at her. "Private notes, lists, correspondence copies. Looks like surveillance and bookkeeping." He looked at Wolfe. "May I talk plainly?" "You will." "This is somebody's operation. A small one, maybe, but tight. Names, dates, places. Some of it about your house. Some about Miss Harrow's foundation. Some about a couple of other people I recognize. One of them in real estate litigation. One of them in municipal contracting. There's a thread here, but I'd need time to pull it." Wolfe's eyes held. The name Percival Vane appears. Saul nodded once. "Yes." Miss Harrow's posture stiffened. "Vane. That is the name you supplied as your husband's rival," Wolfe said. "You did not say he was involved in real estate or municipal contracting." "I didn't know he was. Percival Vane collected orchids. He was a collector, a patron, a nuisance. Nothing more." Saul let his gaze rest on her a second too long. Collectors are often more than one thing. They collect whatever the world lets them. Wolfe's mouth compressed a fraction. "Mr. Panzer, I require a list of all persons who have had access to my plant rooms in the last 6 months. Not casually. Specifically. I also require knowledge of anyone who might reasonably know of such a chamber's existence." Saul's head tilted. "That second part may be shorter if we start with who built the place. You said Horstman's specifications. Is Theodore Horstman still alive?" "His son, Felix Horstman, maintains the rooms. He has an assistant, Evan." Saul nodded, already filing it. "Any contractors? Plumbers, electricians, people who could have seen a seam in the wall?" "None without my knowledge," Wolfe said, and there was a note in his voice that meant, "Any without my knowledge will be made sorry." Celia Harrow leaned forward a little. "Mr. Wolfe sent Mr. Goodwin to my house to retrieve the folio of letters. He'll return with it shortly." Saul's eyes flicked to me. "You're going now?" "That's the plan. Wolfe wants the botanical part of this circus in his hands before the clowns juggle it." Wolfe ignored me. "Miss Harrow, I've accepted your employment." She didn't exhale, but I could see her shoulders lower 0.5 millimeter. Relief, or the room making space for something else. "Thank you." "You will state the terms," Wolfe said. $10,000 retainer, she replied promptly. "And another 10 when the letter is recovered and the responsible party is delivered to justice." Wolfe's eyebrows lifted slightly. That was his way of saying the world isn't entirely hopeless. "Very well." His gaze went to me. "Archie, you will take the car and return with the folio. Mr. Panzer will accompany you." Saul's mouth twitched. "Happy to." "Also," Wolfe added, "Mr. Goodwin will be alert to any tale. If there is an attempt to intercept the folio, I wish to know it." "Sure, I'll wave." Wolfe's eyes continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Miss Harrow, you will remain here." She opened her mouth. "No," Wolfe said, not loud. "You will remain. Your presence outside would be an invitation." Here you are, an anchor. That was a Wolfe word. Means I'm not letting you out of my sight, because either you're my client or you're my problem. She closed her mouth and nodded. As you wish. I got my coat. Saul did the same, and we went out. The November air had a bite. I like it when the city feels sharp. It makes you sharper back. We got into the car and rolled east. Saul quiet beside me. After 2 blocks, he said, "Nice house she's got." "Townhouse," I said, "with a botanical archive and a possible war brewing in it." Saul nodded. She's not lying about the missing letter. I could see it in her eyes when Vane's name came up. Could be she's lying about not knowing his other business. Maybe, but I don't think so. Saul looked out the window. If Vane's moved into municipal contracting, that's muscle, not hobby. You recognize any other names in that portfolio? A couple. Nothing I'd bet the mortgage on yet. But there's a pattern to the dates. Whoever compiled that kept meetings like a priest keeps sin. We drove on in silence for a bit, and I did what I always do when Wolfe sends me out. I ran the street in my head like a film. Who knew about the folio? Harrow Foundation. Fritz, Horstman, maybe the humidity inspector. Who could know about a hidden chamber? If it was in the Kreutzer Oster letter, then anyone who'd read that letter. But the letter was missing now. So someone read it, got the idea, and used it to stash the portfolio in Wolfe's house. Why Wolfe's? Because it was safe, sacred, off limits. Unless you had a way in. We stopped at a light, and I checked the mirror. A dark sedan 2 cars back had been there since we left the brownstone. That might mean nothing in New York, where cars breed like pigeons, but I watched it through the next turn. It stayed. "Saul," I said softly, "you getting that feeling?" He didn't look. Okay, we'll make sure he earns his gas." I took the next right, then a left that wasn't on the direct route. The sedan followed. I smiled. "The fun part," Saul said. "Yeah, Wolfe said no surprises. Let's help." I swung down a side street and pulled into a narrow lane in front of a closed florist. Then I cut the engine and waited. The sedan drifted by slow, too slow to be innocent, then eased to a stop half a block away. Saul watched it a second. One man in front, another in back. Company. I opened my door. "Stay put. If I get perforated, tell Wolfe I died laughing." Saul's dry voice followed me. "Try not to." I walked to the florist window, peered in like a guy checking the roses, and then slid along the storefront to the corner. From there I could see the sedan. The driver was on a phone. The passenger in back was looking at a paper, maybe a map, maybe a photo. They weren't here to buy azaleas. I went back to the car. "Tail confirmed," I said. Saul nodded once, calm as if we'd just ordered lunch. "Then the folio is hot." "Or we are." I started the engine. "Either way, I'd like to meet the cook." We pulled out and headed on, the sedan falling in behind at a respectful distance. When you've got a tail and a prize to pick up, the first rule is to make sure the prize doesn't walk into an ambush. The second is to find out who thinks you're worth following. Wolfe likes rules. So do I. "Saul," I said, "as soon as we get the folio, we're not driving straight back. We're taking a scenic tour through your contacts." His mouth corner lifted. "You want to shake them loose before we return to the big chair. Or lead them somewhere Wolfe can look at them under a lamp." Saul murmured approval. We turned onto 73rd and rolled up to Celia Harrow's townhouse, all limestone dignity and high windows like discreet eyes. I parked at the curb. "Ready?" Saul asked. "Always," I said, and we got out together, 2 guys walking into a rich widow's library with a shadow behind us that had teeth. The Harrow townhouse had the kind of front door that expects a calling card even when a bell is installed. The maid who opened it was efficient and correct, middle-aged, ironed into her role, with a face that had learned to be invisible without being dull. "Yes," she said. "Mr. Goodwin for Mrs. Harrow," I replied, "and Mr. Panzer. We're expected." Her eyes ticked over us the way people do when they've been told to expect something but not what it looks like. Then she stepped aside. "Please come in." We entered a foyer that was all quiet money, marble that had never met a scuff, a Persian runner that probably had its own trust fund, and an air of antiseptic polish that comes from a house being cared for as much as lived in. The maid led us across the hall to a library at the back. I'm a sucker for a good library. This one was very good. Walnut shelves, deep carpet, and a fireplace that had actually been used. The smell was paper, oil, and some expensive wood polish. That's a perfume to me. On a table in the center sat a leather folio, the color of old blood, and beside it, a smaller stack of folders. A white-gloved butler stood at attention nearby. I'll never get used to people who stand at attention in their own houses. "Mrs. Harrow asked that you be given this at once," the maid said. "Great," I said, "and she asked that we not be stopped by anybody with a camera or a gun, so we'll just scoop and scoot." The butler didn't react. The maid blinked once. Then she left. I opened the folio right there because I wanted to see what kind of bomb I was putting in the car. The Kreutzer Oster letters were in crisp, protective sleeves, old ink, old German script, neat enough to make you feel your own handwriting belongs in a sandbox. There were maybe 20 in total, numbered in a tidy modern hand on the sleeves. One sleeve was empty. I didn't need Celia Harrow standing over me to know that was the missing one. But I checked the numbering anyway. The empty sleeve was marked KA-14. Saul had hovered close, hands in pockets, eyes everywhere. "That's the gap," he said quietly. "Yep." I looked through the rest quickly without touching the letters, just enough to see if anything else looked disturbed. The sleeves were intact, aligned, no obvious fingerprints. Whoever took KA-14 had known exactly which one to lift, and had done it with care. "Any idea what that missing letter said?" Saul asked. "Not yet." I closed the folio. "But it had a sketch of a hidden door, named Wolfe. There may be a couple of other things we don't know. Our client thinks it's leverage. Wolfe thinks it's a key." Saul nodded, thinking his own thoughts. "We should also take the folders." I glanced at the smaller stack. "These." Miss Harrow said any related materials. That includes her notes. If she's smart, she already made copies. If she's not, these are the only ones. I slid the folders into my briefcase. Saul did a quick circuit of the library, not nosy but professional. Windows, side doors, lines of sight. The back of the house had French doors leading to a terrace. Locked, but glass is glass. "You feel watched?" I asked him. Saul shook his head. "Not inside, but I expect company outside. Then we don't dawdle." We moved back through the hall and toward the front. The maid and butler were gone, like staff who knew when to evaporate. At the door, Saul paused. "Let me go first," he said. "If they're waiting, they may decide I'm a grand piano and not worth moving." "Fine. But if they shoot you, I'm telling Wolfe you volunteered." We stepped out together. The street was late afternoon quiet, which on East 73rd means the noise is just expensive enough to be polite. I glanced down the block. The dark sedan was there, parked illegally with the self-confidence of a city-owned car. 2 men in it, same as before. But there was another car now. A light grey coupe across the street, driver reclining too far for comfort, newspaper propped up in a way that didn't fool anyone who'd ever read one. "Double tail," I murmured. Saul's face didn't change. They want the folio bad, or they want to know where it goes. Same thing. The folio tells them where to go. We walked casually to my car as if we were leaving a cocktail party. I opened the trunk, set my briefcase inside, put the folio flat on top of it, and shut the lid. The sedan didn't move. The grey coupe didn't move either, waiting to see if we drove or strolled. "Okay," I said as we got in. "Time for the scenic tour." I started the engine, pulled off smoothly, and headed west, but not toward the brownstone. If I could have seen Wolfe through walls, he'd have been lifting an eyebrow right now, but he had told me to be alert to a tail, not to ignore it. We went 2 blocks, took a right, then another right, drifting into a section with more cross streets and less elegance. The sedan tracked us. The grey coupe slid in behind it. They were being careful now, leaving more space, more plausible deniability. That meant they knew what they were doing. Professional, Saul said, or ambitious amateurs with a good teacher. We hit 3rd Avenue, and I made a left that would confuse anyone trying to predict a route. It didn't. Both cars followed. "Let's see how close they want to get," I said. I swung down an alley entrance into a small public garage, rolled through as if I were looking for a spot, then looped around and came back out the same way after 10 seconds. If someone's tailing you, that maneuver either makes them peel off or show their hand. The sedan hesitated. Good. The coupe hesitated too. Then both came in after us, slow and careful. Saul exhaled through his nose. "They're committed. Then let's give them a stage." I drove out the back exit of the garage into a service lane that connected to a side street. The sedan missed the turn for half a beat and had to swing wide. The coupe clipped in after it. Still on us. "Next stop," I said. "Saul's favorite cousin, a place with cops on the corner." "Which corner?" Saul asked. I grinned. "Any corner we choose." 5 minutes later, I coasted up to a stretch near a precinct house on Lexington where you could always count on at least a couple uniforms, stepping out for coffee and a smoke. I parked at the curb abruptly, as if I'd just remembered I needed a newspaper. The sedan rolled right past us and pulled over half a block ahead. The coupe did the same on the other side. They were trying to box without being obvious. That tells you they don't want to be seen by cops any more than we do. Saul reached for the door handle. "Where are you going?" I asked. "Just to take a look. From the sidewalk, not the car. I want faces." "That's why I parked here." "Go." He got out, strolled toward the precinct like a guy who belonged there, and paused at a vending machine. His head turned slightly as he scanned the sedan and the coupe. I stayed in the car and watched too. The sedan's driver was a thick-necked man with a narrow face and a hat worn low. The passenger was younger, pale with wire-rimmed glasses and nervous hands. The coupe's driver was alone. A woman, I think, with hair tucked into a scarf and sunglasses big enough to land planes. She wasn't reading her paper. She was watching Saul. That was interesting. Saul returned, slid into the passenger seat. "Faces?" I asked. He nodded. "Sedan, 2 men. I don't know them. Coupe, woman. I've seen her before." "Where?" "I'm not sure yet. But not in Orchid circles." He rubbed his chin. "We shouldn't lead them to Wolfe. Not with a hidden room already in play." "Agreed. We need a pit stop. Somewhere neutral. Somewhere with a back door." Saul's eyes flicked to my rear-view mirror. "They're waiting for you to move." "Okay, we'll move. But not home." I pulled away from the curb, slow, letting them reattach. I headed south now, toward Midtown, with no plan more refined than shaking a tree and seeing what falls out. Wolfe would call it improvisation and scold me later. But Wolfe wasn't in the car with a folio that might be worth a fortune and a pair of unknowns pressing on our tail like a hand on the trigger. We reached 47th, and I turned into a small, shabby side street lined with supply stores and cheap cafeterias. I knew a place there, an old friend's office, where a man could slip in unnoticed and make a phone call without the world listening. I parked in front of the building as if I had an appointment. "Stay close," I told Saul. We got out. The sedan stopped at the corner, engine running. The coupe cruised past. found a spot across the street, and parked. "Showtime," Saul murmured. We walked into the building, not too fast, not too slow. Inside, in the dim lobby, I got the elevator and pushed for the 3rd floor. As the doors closed, Saul said, "You're going to call Wolfe." "Yeah." "What will you tell him?" I looked at the folio case in my hand, then at Saul's steady face. "The brownstone's not the only thing being watched," I said, "and whatever's behind that orchid door has already drawn an audience." The elevator creaked the way old elevators do when they've seen too many errands and not enough purpose. 3rd floor, doors opening to a dim hallway with paint that had quit trying in 1959. I led Saul left, down to the last door on the right. It had frosted glass, a tired transom, and a name painted in black that I was happy to see still there. L.J. Kramer, Imports. Louis Kramer imported whatever would keep him fed and out of trouble, which often included information for me. He wasn't exactly a friend of justice, but he had a working acquaintance with self-preservation, and that's close enough. I knocked twice, and we went in without waiting. Louis was behind a metal desk with a blotter that had never met a blot. He looked up, squinted, and then his face did the thing it always does when he sees me, a mixture of complaint and cautious joy, like a man who just spotted rain 5 minutes after setting fire to his insurance papers. "Archie," he said. "How nice. What are you doing in this charming slum?" "Working," I said. "You got a phone that isn't friendly with the sidewalk?" He jerked his chin at a back room. "There. Who's your pal?" "Saul Panzer." Louis's eyebrows climbed. "Oh, you're really working." Saul nodded. "Polite." "Mr. Kramer." "Sure, back room. Don't break nothing. I'm still paying for the lamp you broke in 52. "That was a misunderstanding," I said, and took the folio case with me through the doorway. The back room smelled like cardboard and old coffee. There was a phone on a small table, rotary, black, honest. I dialed the brownstone number from memory, faster than I dial most people's birthdays. Fritz answered. "Yeah? It's Archie. Get Wolfe." A clatter, then Wolfe's voice came on, low and already impatient. "Yes? We've got the folio. We've also got a tale. 2 cars, dark sedan with 2 men, grey coupe with 1 woman. They tracked us from your place to Harrow's and all the way downtown. We haven't led them home." There was no sound from Wolfe for a beat. When he spoke, he sounded like the word had been pre-chewed and found bitter. "Describe them." I did. Thick neck and a hat, pale kid with wire rims, scarfed woman with big sunglasses. When I finished, Wolfe said, "None is from the Foundation." "Not that I can tell. The woman might be familiar to Saul." He says not in Orchid circles. "Then she is in other circles." "Archie, remain where you are. Mr. Panzer will telephone me from another line in 5 minutes." "All right. What do you want us to do after that?" "There's no safe way to ghost these clowns without moving. Bring the folio to the brownstone by a route Mr. Panzer will select. But not immediately. You will first ascertain, if possible without risk, who they are. I want a name for at least one of them, that is all." "That's not all," I said. "You're leaving me a little room to improvise, which is dangerous." "Danger," Wolfe said, "is already present. Use your judgment, but do not bring them to my door." The line clicked dead. I hung up, turned, and found Saul watching me from the doorway, expression not quite amused. "He wants a name," I said. Saul nodded. "He'll get one. I'm calling my man in taxi licensing. If that coupe's plated in the city, he can get a registration. Meanwhile, we can get faces closer." "Outside?" I asked. "Outside. Carefully." I checked my watch. 3 minutes hadn't even passed. "We'll give him the 5, I said. Then we go downstairs like a pair of businessmen who forgot the office wasn't a restaurant. Saul used Louis's front phone. I stayed with the folio case, because if a guy's going to get slugged in a hallway, the last thing I need is a priceless botanical archive doing a swan dive into linoleum. At minute 5, Saul came back. "He's on it." He lifted his coat off a chair. "Let's see our audience." We left the back room, nodded to Louis. "You fellows need anything else?" he asked. "Maybe a spare body," I said. "You got one under the desk?" He snorted. "If you die in front of my building, do it on the curb so the cops don't ask questions." "Always thinking," I said, and we took the elevator down. In the lobby, I paused near the directory as if reading, while Saul opened the outer door half an inch to peek. I leaned close. Sedan at the corner still. Coupe across the street still. They're not bored. "Then let's make them less comfortable," Saul murmured. We stepped outside and turned right, not toward my car. We walked at an easy pace to the corner, then crossed the street mid-block, heading toward a coffee stand. The coupe's driver straightened in her seat. The pale kid in the back of the sedan turned his head too sharply. We got coffee. We didn't drink much. We were buying time, giving them a chance to show their move. The sedan rolled forward a few feet. The coupe stayed put. The sedan's driver got out. He didn't come toward us. He walked into a hardware store on the corner, went in like he belonged there, and disappeared. "Spotter's gone inside to call in," I said. Saul's eyes moved. "Or to fetch something. Or to fetch someone." I sipped coffee and tasted nothing. "What about the woman?" "She's the center," Saul said quietly. "The men are hired hands. She's watching us, not the folio. That's personal." I glanced. Even with sunglasses, you could feel her gaze. She had leaned back again, paper still up. But the paper was theater. She was waiting for our next step like a gambler waiting for a tell. "All right," I said. "New plan. We put a knot in their line." Saul tilted his head. "How?" "We take a cab. Leave my car here. Make it look like we're splitting. You ride first. I follow a minute later from another corner. If they're smart, they'll pick one of us. If they're not, they'll try to cover both and we'll see the seams. And if they pick you, then I'll feel loved." Saul almost smiled. "Let's do it." We strolled down the sidewalk as if we hadn't noticed a thing, turned another corner, and stopped at a cab rank. Saul hailed one, got in, and I watched him go north. I waited 12 seconds, counted because timing is a language tails understand. Then I walked another half block, hailed my own cab, and went south. In my rear mirror, I saw the sedan pull out and follow Saul's cab. The coupe didn't move. So she picked me. Interesting. We went 3 blocks. The coupe followed, smooth, not rushing. At the next light, I paid off the driver and got out fast, ducking into a crowded deli. I threaded through the sandwich line, out the back door and into a service alley that let me come out on the next street over. There's a childish pleasure in doing that to a tale, like a magician making a coin vanish from a skeptic's ear. But it's also practical. If she was good, she'd be waiting at the next cross street. If she was sloppy, she'd overshoot. She was good. The grey coupe rolled slowly at the far end of the block, paused, then turned, circling to reacquire. She wasn't just a watcher. She was trained. I ducked into a doorway, stayed still as a shadow, and watched her pass. When she did, I got a good look at her face, tilted down just enough for the sunglasses to slip. I knew that face. Not by name, by category. She was the kind of woman who sits 2 tables away in a restaurant and never eats, the kind who rides elevators without pressing buttons, the kind who says, "Mr. Vane sends his regards," right before somebody else says, "bang." She was in Vane's service, or in somebody's who wore Vane like a glove. I let her go by, then stepped out and hailed another cab. This one I told to take me to a specific address that had nothing to do with Wolfe, Orchids, or Celia Harrow. I chose it because it had a lobby with 2 exits, a doorman who knew me, and a florist next door that would survive a sudden purchase. Halfway there, my pocket buzzed. Payphone days are dead, so it was Saul calling my cell. "Archie," he said, voice low. "I've got a name. The sedan's driver is Vince Toller. He works freelance security for Percival Vane. The kid's called Nicky Rube, also vein muscle." "Good," I said. "That means my hunch about the woman is probably right. She peeled off and tailed me. No name yet, but she's pro." "Where are you?" "On my way to a neutral lobby." "She's behind me." "Want me to come?" "Not unless you've got a net. I'll lose her and head to Wolfe by subway. You bring the car back to the brownstone alone. If they swing on you, let them. I want Wolfe to see what kind of courage they've got at his door when I'm not holding it open." Saul exhaled once. "You're sure?" "I'm sure enough to be wrong. Get the folio safe. I'll be there with my report." "Okay. Watch yourself." He hung up. I pocketed the phone and looked out at the city sliding by. We had the folio, a confirmed vein tail, and a hidden chamber in Wolfe's Orchid rooms that had held modern surveillance papers. Those things don't coexist unless somebody's playing a deep game. The coupe was still there, 2 cars back, patient as a metronome. I smiled without meaning to. Let her follow. I had a brownstone to get back to, and Nero Wolfe waiting in his chair like a spider who'd just discovered a new corner of his web had been tampered with. By the time I got back downstairs, my head had a new tenant. The idea that the hidden chamber had been a thoroughfare, not a novelty. I kept my face plain because my face is Wolfe's first instrument, and he doesn't like it played out of tune. Wolfe was where I had left him. Celia Harrow had migrated to the side table with the typewriter and was doing what rich widows do when told to, working like it cost her pride, which it did. Saul was bent over the portfolio papers, reading with the quiet violence of a man who hates being surprised by facts. Wolfe looked up when I entered. "Well." "Somebody's been using it," I said. "The dust shows older prints in there. Light soles. Multiple trips. Not today. And a graphite or grease smear on the right jamb near the inner latch." Wolfe's lids lowered, his way of nodding without giving you the pleasure. "Thank you. That chamber has had traffic," I added. "Not from Fritz, not from you, not from me." "That is obvious." He shifted his gaze toward the clock. "It is nearly 6. We will begin." At 6 sharp, I marched Felix Horstman and Evan down from the plant floor as if I were bringing 2 uneasy altar boys to confession. Felix was in his 50s, bony and meticulous, with hands that looked permanently damp from tending humid rooms. He wore his competence the way a priest wears black. Evan was younger, big-shouldered, eager to look dependable, and failing because eagerness reads as appetite in a room where Wolfe sits. They stepped into the office and stopped short at the sight of Celia Harrow and Saul Panzer. Outsiders in the brownstone always make staff feel like the floor shifted. "Mr. Wolfe," Felix said stiffly. "Mr. Horstman, Mr. Evan." Wolfe's tone was polite and unyielding. "Sit." They sat. I stood behind them by the door, a piece of furniture that could talk. Wolfe began as though continuing a meal. "Mr. Horstman, in the last 6 months, who has entered the plant rooms besides yourself, Mr. Evan, Fritz Brenner, and myself?" Felix's eyes went to mine, annoyed that I was there to hear. "No one without permission. A plumber came in August, an electrician in September. Both were supervised." "Names?" Felix supplied them. Wolfe wrote nothing. He doesn't need to. He remembers. "Any representative of the Harrow Foundation?" Felix shook his head. "Only Dr. Rourke last month with Mrs. Harrow, to bring the folio and take humidity readings." She stood at the door. Fritz was with her. Wolfe's eyes flicked to Fritz in the doorway beyond, who had joined us silently like a loyal ghost. Fritz frowned, nodded once. Any other botanist, scholar, or collector? No. Wolfe turned to Evan. Mr. Evan, you were on a ladder in the third orchid room 2 weeks ago while a man from the Harrow Foundation observed from the doorway. Correct? Evan blinked. Yes, sir. Did you observe Mr. Horstman or Mr. Brenner handle a folio of letters? No, sir. Did you observe the foundation man handle anything? No, sir, he just took notes. Didn't touch a thing. Did you handle the folio? Evan swallowed. No, sir. Wolfe sat back. Very good. You may go. Felix looked startled. That's all? For now. Wolfe's eyes held him. Mr. Horstman, you will keep your assistants out of the plant rooms tomorrow morning until I say otherwise. Felix stiffened but nodded. He and Evan left. Celia Harrow's fingers hovered over the typewriter keys. Saul's face said he'd just found a paragraph that smelled like kerosene. Wolfe watched the door close and then said, to no one in particular, false economy? Straight questions to the innocent waste little time. I knew what that meant. He was done with Horstman, either innocent or irrelevant. Saul cleared his throat. I've got structure. Wolfe turned. Speak. Saul laid a page on Wolfe's desk, not handing it to him but placing it where he might deign to glance. The portfolio is a working file for a pressure scheme. Targets: 2 city officials in parks and procurement, 1 private contractor, and the Harrow Foundation Westchester greenhouse property. There are meeting dates and contact notes. Someone's pushing to win city greenhouse contracts and to take control of Harrow's research site. It also includes a note about Wolfe cover. That phrase appears twice. Once alongside the phrase Orchid door. Celia Harrow made a small sound. Take control? How? Saul's eyes stayed gentle. Lease assumptions, forged correspondence, a plan to show Harrow's trustees you're incompetent and to offer rescue. That's the wording. She went pale, but she didn't crumble. Who wrote this? Saul looked at Wolfe. Handwriting in the margins is a neat slanted print. Some of the typed pages list initials. Most consistent are LR and PV. Wolfe's gaze sharpened like a blade being honed. Dr. Lila Rourke, I said quietly. And Percival Vane. Celia Harrow's head snapped up. Rourke, that's impossible. Impossible things happen in my house this week, I said. Try unlikely. Wolfe raised a hand. Miss Harrow, how long has Dr. Rourke been your curator? 7 years. She was my husband's choice. She's brilliant, devoted. Devoted to orchids, perhaps. Wolfe's tone was mild. Devotion to an object often excludes devotion to the owner. Celia looked stricken and angry at once. She has had no reason. Wolfe interrupted gently. Reason is not required for ambition. He reached for the bell and pressed it. When I went to answer, he stopped me. Archie, you will telephone Dr. Rourke. Tell her I will see her at once. Tell her it concerns the missing letter and that Mrs. Harrow is present. She will come. You will be amiable. If she demurs, you will be persuasive. I went out to the front room and used the house phone. Dr. Lila Rourke answered on the 3rd ring, voice crisp, practical, and unhurried. Dr. Rourke, Archie Goodwin for Mr. Wolfe. We need to see you right away at the brownstone. Mrs. Harrow is here. It's about the missing Kreutzer-Oster letter. There was a pause long enough to make me see her eyes narrowing in my head. I wasn't aware Mrs. Harrow had engaged Mr. Wolfe, she said. She did. And since your name is on the list of people who last handled the folio, Wolfe wants you now. Another pause. Then, I'll be there in 40 minutes. Splendid. Bring whatever notes you've kept about the folio and your Westchester greenhouse property. I let the words sit. Wolfe likes thoroughness. Her voice tightened a hair. Of course. I hung up and went back. She's coming, I said. Wolfe nodded. Then we assemble the remaining pieces. He sent me out twice more, once to bring in the humidity inspector, a middle-aged Foundation employee named Gerald Nuttall, who looked like he'd rather measure basements than be measured by Wolfe, and once to telephone Inspector Kramer at Homicide with a carefully vague request for his presence at 8. Kramer grumbled, and then came because Wolfe had a way of making grumbles feel like debts. By the time Dr. Rourke arrived, all of us were in position. Wolfe in the red chair, Saul to one side, Celia Harrow straight-backed in the client chair, Nuttall sweating faintly on the sofa, Fritz hovering like disapproval incarnate, and me at my desk with a pad I didn't need. Dr. Lila Rourke entered as if already sure she was the smartest person in the room. She was mid-40s, slender with the cool composure of a laboratory, and eyes that had learned to read the world like a specimen slide. She nodded to Celia, nodded more cautiously to Wolfe, and flicked a glance at Saul and Nuttall. "Mr. Wolfe, Mrs. Harrow." She smiled slightly. "This seems dramatic for a missing letter." "Dramatic is your term, Doctor," Wolfe said. "Sit." She sat. She crossed her legs neatly. I noticed her shoes automatically. Low, narrow soles, light tread. My head said hello to my upstairs dust. Wolfe began without preamble. "You were present when the Kreutzer Oster folio was last consulted in my plant rooms." "Yes," she said. "Briefly. I did not touch it." "You saw its contents?" "In passing. I know them well." "You know letter 14. Her eyes didn't move. "Yes." "What did it contain?" Oster describing his American visit, a sketch of a shelving arrangement used by a collector, some commentary on hybridization methods. No mention of a concealed chamber. There it was, the first real effect. Not a flinch, not a gasp, just a tiny tightening at the corners of her mouth, like a seam being pulled. "It mentioned a collector's practice of hiding certain papers," she said slowly. "I would not call it a chamber. It was a niche." "A niche behind the north shelving in my third plant room," Wolfe said. Her gaze snapped to him. "How could you possibly—" "Because it exists." Wolfe's voice remained even. "And because someone has used it repeatedly, leaving light-souled impressions in its dust and a graphite smear upon its jam." She opened her mouth, then closed it, recalibrating. "If there is such a place, Mr. Wolfe, I had no knowledge of it." Wolfe inhaled through his nose. "You are lying." Celia Harrow made a choking sound. "Mr. Wolfe." Wolfe raised a hand. "Mrs. Harrow, you hired me to speak plainly." "Doctor, you stole letter 14 from the folio." Dr. Rourke's composure shifted into something harder. "That is absurd." "Is it?" Wolfe nodded at Saul. Saul slid a page across. "Those are photocopies from the portfolio found in the chamber. Your marginal notes appear on them. The handwriting matches letters you've written to your trustees. I compared it." Dr. Rourke did not look at the page. She looked at Saul with a kind of distant contempt. "Handwriting analysis is imprecise." "True," Saul said. "That's why I didn't stop there." He laid another sheet beside it. "These are emails between you and Percival Vane, printed from your Westchester greenhouse server. A clever habit you have, saving copies offline. I had a technician pull backups from the system. You didn't delete the archive." Her face went white. I watched her hands. They had gone still in her lap. Too still. Wolfe went on as if speaking to a class. "You and Vane plan to wrest the Westchester property from the Harrow Foundation, win city greenhouse contracts through bribery and pressure, and use my house as a safe repository for your working file. You needed access to the chamber, and letter 14 gave it to you. So you removed the letter, photographed my Orchid room door to assure Vane you could use the route, and left the note for Mrs. Harrow." Dr. Rourke's voice came out low. "You are constructing fantasy." "No, I'm arranging facts." Wolfe's eyes were chips of river ice. "You were the only person, besides Mrs. Harrow herself, with repeated legitimate access to the folio and to my plant rooms. You knew of the letter's sketch. You had motive, ambition, and perhaps resentment. You had opportunity, and your shoes matched the prints. She stood up abruptly. This is a farce. Mrs. Harrow, you know me. You know my work. Celia Harrow looked at her as if someone had stood up in church and pulled off a mask. Lila. Why? The question was not a demand. It was the wounded bewilderment of a woman who had trusted competence as if it were character. Dr. Rourke's lips trembled once, a brief crack in porcelain, then her chin lifted. Because your husband did not understand what he owned. Because you don't, because orchids do not survive on sentiment. Wolfe spoke softly. They survive on care, Doctor. A distinction you forgot. She turned on him, anger flaring now that the cool shell had failed. You sit in your chair and hoard beauty like a dragon. Your orchids are trophies. My work is living science. I needed resources. Vane offered them, funding, influence, an end to the Foundation's meddling. And I didn't intend bribery. I intended a correction. By blackmail. Wolfe's voice remained calm. By theft. By implicating me. You would have been untouched, she snapped. Your name on that letter was a shield, not a target. If the file were ever discovered, Vane would take the fall. He's crude. He's greedy. He would cling to the old Orchid feud while I rebuilt the Westchester site under a consortium he didn't understand. So he was your camouflage, I said. And when he got nervous, you threw him a bone, sending his men after the folio. Her eyes flicked to me for the first time with real hate. You don't understand anything beyond a joke. Maybe not, I said. But I understand someone walking through Wolfe's orchids like they were a subway platform. That's not science. That's arrogance. Wolfe pressed his bell once. The door opened. Inspector Kramer filled it with his trench coat and irritation. You just couldn't keep out of trouble, could you? He growled. Come in, Inspector, Wolfe said pleasantly. You're in time to arrest Dr. Lila Rourke for theft, conspiracy, and attempted extortion. Mr. Panzer will provide documentation. Mrs. Harrow may wish to press charges. Kramer stared at Rourke, then at Saul's papers, then at me as if I'd taken up a new hobby he disapproved of. Extortion of whom? Of city officials and private contractors, Saul said calmly. Plus embezzlement and fraud against the Harrow Foundation. The file was in Wolfe's concealed chamber. Kramer grunted. Concealed chamber? Do not ask, Wolfe said. Arrest her. Rourke's shoulders squared, but her eyes had gone flat now, the way a person's go when the last move has failed and the board fades. Kramer took her arm. She did not resist. As he led her out, she looked once at Celia Harrow. Not pleading, not apologizing, just measuring the wreckage. Celia didn't speak until the door closed. Then she whispered, I trusted her. Wolfe's voice was gentler than I expected. Trust is not a vice, Mrs. Harrow, but it is a luxury. You can afford luxuries. Others cannot. She swallowed. What about Vane? Kramer will see Mr. Vane shortly. Dr. Rourke's emails will lead him there. Your missing letter will be recovered, likely from her files. Wolfe's eyes sharpened again. And my concealed chamber will be sealed. Fritz made a sound like a man hearing blasphemy forgiven. Gott sei Dank. Saul gathered his papers. I'll give Kramer copies tonight. Wolfe nodded. Do so. Your fee will be met. Saul stood, touched his hat. Good night, Wolfe. Archie. He gave Celia a polite nod and left. Celia remained seated, staring at nothing. Wolfe watched her for a moment, then said, You should return home, Mrs. Harrow. You will have calls to make, trustees to reassure, locks to change. She looked up, exhausted. Yes, thank you, Mr. Wolfe. Truly. He inclined his head, a small formal movement that for him counts as generosity. I escorted her to the front door and called her a cab. She left like a woman stepping out of a room that had rearranged itself into a stranger. When I came back, the brownstone had the hush it usually wears at this hour, the hush between dinner prep and dinner ritual. Wolfe was already at his desk, making a note on a small card in his spidery hand. "What are you writing?" I asked. "A reminder," he said without looking up. "For what?" "To never again assume I know all my own walls." "That's philosophical, boss. And kind of adorable." He looked up then, and a glint appeared in his eye. The glint that means he will permit my existence a little longer. "Archie, you observe the essential motive, but you did not give it its proper name. Ambition. Envy." Wolfe's voice was flat and sure. Dr. Rourke envied those who possessed what she loved. It is a common human vice, particularly among the intelligent. "That's comforting. I'll put it on a pillow." "Do not." He rose, slowly, heavily, properly, for dinner. "Remember this. Orchids require discipline. Humans require it too. But when humans mistake discipline for entitlement, they become parasites." He moved toward the dining room, that vast man returning to his pleasures, as if the day had been a minor interruption. I followed, because that's my discipline. At the threshold, I glanced once toward the stairs leading up to the orchids. The third room was quiet in my mind now, its secret door exposed, its dust reed, its arrogance punished. Tomorrow, Wolfe would have Horstman seal it and then lecture the walls for failing him. Tonight, the house was whole again. "Hey, boss," I said as we went in. "You still think the Vatican needs Swiss guards?" Wolfe didn't turn. "The Vatican also has faith, Archie. I rely on evidence." "Good thing," I said, "because faith wouldn't have found the smear on that jam." He paused just long enough for me to know he heard. Then Fritz opened the dining room door, and the brownstone returned to its true order. A man of appetite, a man of sources, and a man of words, all behaving as if the world outside had never learned how to ring a bell.